So, with us today, Kelley Keefe, the first female president of ERC in their 100-year history. She joined them in 2004 and was selected as president in 2018. During her leadership role there, she has expanded their training services. She founded the Women's Leadership Institute, and she has focused a lot on how to create a healthy workplace culture. And I'll just highlight three of my favorite values in their workplace culture: family first, fun, and flexible. I intentionally did not choose the fitness one. She is a proud member of the class of 2020 for Leadership Cleveland. And Jill Koski. Jill is president and CEO of Holden Forest and Gardens, a role she assumed in November of 2017. We are blessed that Jill chose to come to us in Northeast Ohio from her home in Illinois, where she worked at the Morton Arboretum and also the Shedd Aquarium. She has led tremendous growth at the Holden Arboretum and the Botanical Gardens, and they boast 21,000 household members. So in the midst of this huge period of growth, in came a pandemic. But I'm thrilled to say that Holden Gardens just reopened today for members, and looking forward to enjoying some time there. And Lisa Damour. Lisa is a nationally recognized psychologist, a best-selling author with 2 books on the New York Times bestseller list. She is a New York Times columnist and a regular contributor to CBS News. Here in Cleveland, she is a familiar face, speaking at forums and enlightening all of us. She serves as the executive director at Laurel School, the Center for Research on Girls. I have always found Lisa to be that reassuring voice that brings calm to those of us who are really wrestling with complex issues. So, ladies, welcome, and we look forward to hearing your inspirational words.
Thank you, Marianne. Thank you, Bob. Thank you to all of you for being here with us today. I, too, am honored and I'm so excited for this session that we have today. It's going to be an action-packed 45 minutes. Let me just kind of set the stage as to why the three of us are here today. So ERC, as Marianne said, has been around for 100 years. In fact, it's our anniversary, our 100th anniversary this Sunday. And I said, COVID or no COVID, we are going to proceed and hopefully we last another 100 years. We were started by business leaders, just like each of you, that realized how important their employees are. In the 1920s, if you think back upon history, you can kind of understand what was happening, and employers needed to rethink and retool the way that their relationship was with their employees. And so that's how we were formed. And today, this is ever so important. And when I think about, so we have members that belong to ERC, and so we've received hundreds and hundreds of calls over the past 8 weeks from leaders looking for solutions and answers to questions related to their employees. And one thing that seems to keep being the constant is the employee, and each employee is at a different state. I'm sure each of you are going from anger to acceptance to denial. We're going through all of these phases on a daily basis, and then sometimes even on an hourly basis, depending on what's happening. And so I feel like it's a true opportunity that we have as leaders to really think about each individual and how we're working with them. And so Jill and I, actually in a Leadership Cleveland session, we started talking about how employees are feeling this sense of loss. We are all dealing with some sort of a loss, and some employees are dealing with this at many higher levels than others. And us as leaders, we sometimes have a little bit more vision as to what's happening, what our future path is, and maybe the employees don't have that same confidence and they don't have that same information. So what can we do as we try to travel through this next period of time? I will also reassure you that if you don't have all the answers, that's okay. That's why we have, Lisa here to help us. We've got quite a few questions that we want to ask her. But the other thing that I've realized and come to know is that every week we do a poll and we ask leaders what they're doing. The poll last week said, when is your return to work date if you're going back to work? And from 100 different companies, we received 15 different answers, and then also 40% of them said that they still didn't even have a date. So anywhere from May through June, and then we don't even know. So together, I think we can lean on each other and use this opportunity and the question and the answer at the end to help us. So with that, I just wanted to set the stage. I know Jill, so what I thought was kind of unique about this session is bringing Jill with real life scenarios. So she's got some general questions, and then she's going to follow those up with real life scenarios that I think are pretty relatable to everyone on this webinar with us. So hopefully you can learn something from each of them. And then I will be taking questions at the end. So if you want to add them in the chat box, I'll be handling that. So with that, Jill and Lisa, I'm going to hand it over to you to have some time talking. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Kelley. And so we opened today, and what's really interesting, we opened to members, the Arboretum grounds, and I am back in my office for the first time in 8 weeks. And it's really strange, and this is kind of what we're going to talk about today. I am the only person in the building today, and I'm used to having all of my team right here with me. So it's pretty strange. It's a very different environment. I went out and greeted my staff today who are welcoming our members. I was wearing a mask. They were wearing masks. We were apart from one another. So I'm starting to live what it's going to be like coming back, and in a place where we are wearing masks and we're in an outdoor environment. So it's a really different interaction. And if I walk down the hallway, I have to put on a mask per our policies for working with our staff. So I'm actually really excited. This is kind of the perfect day to be having this conversation. And I'm also feel really lucky because I was posing a bunch of questions to Kelley that were running through my mind. And I have the gift of being able to ask these questions directly to Lisa, and she's going to give me all the answers. But so I think the format will be, I have about 5 or 6 questions, and then hopefully we'll leave plenty of time for you all to ask questions as well. But questions that I have that are on specific circumstances that I've experienced directly with my team, and hopefully it'll be helpful for you, and maybe these are some of the same questions you've been asking. But I think I'll just start with, we opened today, and the decision to open was as difficult as it was to close. There's just so many layers, anticipated and unanticipated. But I think I'd like to start with one of the most challenging pieces is managing that my staff were on a real continuum when it came to how comfortable and uncomfortable they were with us reopening and with coming back to work. I had people begging me to reopen, saying, we really need to get this place open. I want to come back, really excited. And on the other hand, literally sort of opposite end of the spectrum, I had people really afraid or uninterested in coming back to work because they were concerned about the environment. So my first question, Lisa, is simply, how can we as managers really find that middle ground and not, it's challenging to make a decision when you're dealing with real fears, real concerns that just are on a wide spectrum.
So let me think, and I'm delighted to be with you. I want to lower expectations. I don't have all the answers. I do have ways to think about things. That's what psychologists have. We think about things in our particular way, and maybe those are helpful. So just to think about this question and people coming back and the wide range in which they engage. I think one thing that we have to our tremendous advantage in Ohio is how our government has handled this. That we have Amy Acton, whom we trust. And so I think as these questions arise and people are, I'm worried about this, I'm worried about that, I think we actually don't have to be the experts on health questions. I think we really can say, here's what we're hearing from the state, here's what we're hearing about how to manage the health thing. I think sometimes people approach us as though we should have an understanding of the epidemiology or the public health ramifications. That's not what we're good at, but we have people who are good at that. So I would say as employees bring their concerns, one thing I would want to do is invite a neutral third party into that conversation. And Amy Acton's a great example of the neutral third party that we can defer to as we think through how these choices get made. I think the other thing that sometimes, especially with something like a disease, which really hits us where we live, I mean, it really is very personally frightening. I think sometimes people can feel very intense that their perspective is the perspective and they need you to adopt their perspective. And I think that one of the things that I watch leaders having to do all the time is remind people that they're members of an organization that has people with a wide variety of opinions. And as the leader, you're trying to work with all of the members of that organization to find a solution that will work well enough for everyone. And so I think that kind of perspective of, we're not making the call, we're going to let the experts make the call, and we are an organization that has people at all ends of the spectrum on this, and we're thinking through solutions that will work for as many as possible. I think that's the posture you want to take as we come into this. And just thinking about how much this has exposed our personal lives to our workplaces. How much the tradition has been that you show up at work and you check it all at the door and you don't bring it in. I think there's interesting work to be done, and let's keep thinking this through, Jill, as you and I talk about how do we wade into that space with employees about stuff that feels so personal, whether it's like their toddler interrupting meetings or their own health fears, while also not intruding on people's privacy or crossing an important boundary. I think that's some of what we're going to want to think through today.
So maybe related to that is, I think we're all really intent. We all want to be compassionate leaders. We want to, give, all the support that we can to our employees in the right way. But I know that one thing I've noticed within my direct team, and it depends, right? Because we all are at different places on different days. One of us will arrive to the meeting and the energy will be sort of anxious and maybe a little wound up. And it becomes this place of what I can see is they're bringing to the meeting. They've had a conversation with a member of their team or with someone else who's expressed a significant amount of fear. Mm-hmm. And so then it's sort of what you're describing, in that they sort of absorb all that fear and then they just bring that to the table with sort of without figuring out, and this is where I need some help on, how do you validate these fears as I hear you, mm-hmm. without letting that paralyze you or the individual from mm-hmm. moving forward?
So there's two principles we want to work with here. Number one, anxiety is a normal and healthy emotion. So I'm going to back us way out of this and then back us back in. Anxiety is pervasive. We're going to see it persistently through all of this. And one thing that had gotten really off the rails in the culture before COVID-19 is that people had started to talk about anxiety as though it was entirely pathological, always and everywhere pathological. No one in psychology has ever seen it that way. We see anxiety as a normal, healthy emotion that alerts us to threats. So I think the first framework what you want to have for everybody's anxiety is that at some level it's probably appropriate, or it's certainly not inherently problematic. And I wouldn't have had to say that 20 years ago. In the culture 20 years ago, we saw anxiety as more normal. We've moved away from that, and that's actually not helping us now. Anxiety is normal and helpful. So for somebody to show up at a meeting anxious, that in and of itself is not problematic. It may actually be very accurately attuned to a problem. And so we want to really engage the anxiety usefully. Okay, so there's that principle. But the other principle is anxiety is contagious. And so what you're describing is somebody who had a really amplified conversation with an employee, got amplified and shows up at the meeting, and it just sort of carries along and may not be useful or helpful. So there's actually an extraordinarily simple definition of unhelpful anxiety in psychology. So we love anxiety. We see it as normal and healthy. We don't see it as inherently problematic. We see it as protective until we are overestimating the dangers we're in, and we're underestimating our resources to manage them. And so what I would say is, if anybody comes at you with anxiety that feels like it's about to catch or feels too big, go right into that formula. Are they overestimating the danger? Are they underestimating their resources? So how sick does someone have to be for someone to get sick around them? What can we do to prevent that? That we're always going to be pushing down on one and pushing up on the other. So to just summarize, because I think the stuff around anxiety gets so fraught and loaded really fast. Anxiety is normal and healthy. Anxiety can be catching, so you want to be careful. And if you feel like it's running away from you, don't overestimate the danger. Don't underestimate the resources you have to address it.
Great.
If I can chime in there, Jill and Lisa, I want to also make sure that we're bringing how else employers can provide more resources. So Lisa, I know you can be a resource to organizations. I think we need to make sure that we're also giving those supervisors and those managers the tools to handle that. So not only are they taking on the anxiety of this individual, but also think about some of your supervisors and managers have their own baggage. And so now we've layered this additional baggage on top of them. So, we need to recognize that we also need to make sure that our managers and supervisors have the tools, the resources, all of those, so that they can handle that as well. So I think that, we're talking about different layers here, but it's a responsibility of everyone within the organization, starting from the top, to meet people where they are.
I think that's right. And I think what we have to recognize is everybody is worn thin.
Yeah.
And so you've got a worn thin manager hearing it from 4 worn thin employees. Mm-hmm. And they're not made of titanium. Right. And so part of how they made and manage it is to bring it up and unload it on a very worn thin leader. So we have to just name it.
Right. Yep.
Great. So my next question goes to what Kelley talked about earlier, related to a sense of loss, or sort of grieving what was before. So I think my sense on some of the employees on my team who wanted to come back really quickly is they felt like, I want to return to something normal, the place that I knew. And what I know is, especially coming back today, we're not coming back to the same place that we left 8 weeks ago. I'm wearing a mask. I'm going to be, even if I'm in the office and my colleagues are in the office, I'm probably going to be meeting with them via Zoom. And then there are really simple things. There's in different buildings in our organization, there are kitchen areas, and I know there's 1 or 2 teams that are really used to, and it's such a great bonding thing for them. They would meet every day. They would all have lunch together, literally around a kitchen table, and things like that just aren't going to happen anymore. And so I'd love some, help or thought on that process of how do we work people through this idea of whatever you go back to, it's not going to be the same. And how are we sensitive to the fact that it really is a sense of loss, and there'll be some level of grieving with that. Even today, I'm here by myself. Yeah. And when I saw someone, I had to be pretty distant from them to talk with them.
Yeah. So, this is one of those moments where we know what we've given up, but we don't really know what we're getting. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's such a hard moment. Those happen in life, and I think that's a really hard moment to take. Because you're so clear on the losses and so unclear on what's going to come into that space instead. And what I find actually is that phrasing exactly helps people. Just to say, yes, we know what we've given up. We're still figuring out what we're getting. But what it does is it marks in time that the leader gets it, that we have given up a lot. And the leader gets it that new things are going to have to come into that space. And that new things will come into that space. And there's, the word, as I was thinking about getting to be with you today, I think the word that is going to actually have to be our watchword is creativity. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people's impulse is, well, how do I replicate what I had? Okay, they can't, or it's going to be really lame. Right? And then it's going to make them feel worse, about this is so much worse than it used to be. Like, this isn't what it was like sitting at the table. So what I would say is, in that getting space, I think we have to be really creative and help people be creative and understand that humans are fundamentally adaptive. And I'll give a really simple example. So I have lost, like all of us, all of my collegial contact at work. All of the hallway conversations, all the water cooler conversations, all of those, the term we use in psychology are weak ties that are actually really important to our overall mental health. And what I have started to do, and it really happened randomly, is I now, at a safe social distance, walk 3 mornings a week with a colleague I really love, but we were not engaged that way with each other before. And I am really clear, like, this is holding me together. Like, this is actually making a huge difference. It's not a replication of what we had. It's a new thing that we can do under these conditions. Mm-hmm. So I think the way to maybe help people as a leader is to think, okay, well, what need was being met by getting to sit around a table together?
Mhm.
What's a way to meet that need under current conditions?
Mhm.
And it may look totally different than the sitting around a table together.
Mhm.
But it's just the need needs to be met. And that's the contact and the, you know, getting to see each other.
Yep. Yep. No, that's great. I'm going to skip a question because I think this might follow well. In that, when we were having the conversation to talk about what today might be, I said I actually felt a little bit guilty asking this question, because I want to honor that this is a really difficult and uncertain time. But I've honestly seen, and to your idea of creativity, that this is also crisis brings an opportunity. I know Patrick's on here from the film festival. There's a real opportunity to do things differently and try something new. And there are silver linings. And there are days where I'm like, oh, because of this, which sometimes is hard for me, because of this pandemic, I can now really think differently about how I'm doing this, or this thing that has been hard to move off. I can now maybe get rid of and put something new in place because I have an excuse. I mean, I feel a little guilty saying that, but I also think that gets to that side of, we don't know what the new side is. So how do we move our staffs from this place of, I've lost so much, or things are different, or we had to close, or we can't do this anymore, but to this idea of, let's have the conversation about opportunity and silver lining without it being tone deaf to whatever else might be going on.
Well, so the phrase, I wish this were my phrase, but it's not, but the phrase I heard last week was, how do we build it back better? And I think that's going to be a really useful construction, because it does acknowledge we are having to build it back, right? We're down to the studs. Like, this is not, no one is good with that. But we do have to build it back. So given that we're building it back, what do we do differently? And I actually think there should be no discomfort about talking about what disruption makes possible. I think across all industries, no matter how good you are, there's a lot of, we do it this way because we've always done it that way. And now we are having to re-examine all of that, which is probably to the better. I work a lot on adolescents and other things, and I am watching, I'm like, you know what? If people's idea of going to college was to get drunk at frat parties, maybe it's okay if that gets suspended for a little while. Like, we do it that way because we've done it that way, but that doesn't mean it was a good way. I think there's a lot of that built into, we chug along, we make small adjustments, so what does a great disruption make possible? And especially around where family life enters into work life. Thinking about Kelley's, your ethics of your organization, like, you were out ahead on that, but now everybody needs to be there. Everybody should have been there.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm actually thinking, Lisa, too, I think sometimes, and for probably many people on this call, we're in leadership roles, and I think sometimes it's easier for us to, because it's our job, to move to this place of thinking new, thinking differently, thinking, many steps ahead. But I think I'm also, as I start to have these conversations, I'm realizing that with people who maybe have jobs that are maybe more routine when they come in every day, that it just be being a little bit more gentle and finding those really small things that they might be able to do differently. Because I also recognize that some people's interest in change is at a different place than mine may be. I may think it's fun. Someone else may think it's really scary. But I'm thinking that I'm going to have to level this out a little bit depending upon that person's role and their place.
But I think you're right on. And it's so cool to start to think about employees like, okay, who has an appetite for tremendous change? Who not so much, right? And honoring that. Who are the most creative? And I hesitate to use this phrase because it's so hackneyed, out of the box thinkers I've got. Who is going to help us figure out how to do the same old procedures under these new conditions, right? But to actually assess who your team is on dimensions that maybe were not so salient before. But then, and I'm finding this with a lot of things in this whole process, then you think, why weren't we thinking about those things before? Why weren't those ways I could readily describe everyone on my team?
I want to jump in here on this one too, and we're getting some really great questions, and we will get to those. But this is also an opportunity. Maybe silver lining isn't the definition of it, for you to see some employees in action and with challenges in front of them that they've never experienced. And, so maybe the young professional, maybe the experienced professional, whatever it is, pass off. What I keep saying to leaders in my sessions is pass off the responsibility from you to somebody else. Give someone else that opportunity. Don't take all the burden. If you haven't created a safety council, create a safety council or wellness committee, pass that on and have different generations. We talk about generations all the time. This is the first time that all generations in the workplace are experiencing something so traumatic at the same time. We all have our own different experiences that we bring. Now, collectively, we're doing this. So continue to push, not to overburden your employees, but to give them opportunities to rise and to meet the new demands that are needed.
Well, and look, I think that's absolutely so critical to say. And when I was thinking about this and sort of like the leadership models I'm aware of in Cleveland, so we've got Amy Acton with her, trustworthy straight shooting style, which I think is really something we can all emulate. And then, what I've heard from sort of around the way, at the Cleveland Clinic, that they were just saying to people, like, I know you're a surgeon, but go solve this problem, this procurement problem, because you're a smart person, you'll figure it out. And I think it does two things at once. It both reduces the burden on an otherwise overwhelmed leader. But when we look at the research, and we have a huge body of research on people managing under chronic stress conditions, one of the things that helps is having a sense of meaning. Mm-hmm. And so it really is a twofer, right? Both that the leader gets to designate and delegate. And what I loved about what I heard about the Cleveland Clinic is it wasn't people's specialty area. They were just smart people. And so they just told them, like, go figure it out. And it gives the employee what they need, which is a sense of meaning and utility and creativity. And I think that's what we see gets people through.
Mm-hmm. And maybe I'll ask one more question and then we'll go, because I know there's a lot of others. But in addition to finding that role, I think we held a staff meeting, our first all staff meeting. So there were about 80 people who logged onto the Zoom call. And I had, a presentation of sort of updates that we wanted to give everyone. But then the rest of the agenda for that staff meeting was just they could submit questions in advance, and they could submit them privately or publicly, and they could just ask questions during the call. And I also found that also just allowing people to engage or offer solutions or own something and put it out there was just so helpful in validating everything and then responding to all of those questions as well to the best of our ability. And there were questions where I'm like, I just don't know yet, but this idea of being transparent and being safe, and our staff, I would say, honestly, I've never been more proud of the people that I work with and that I entirely depend upon. And this idea of what they were looking for is safe, and safe means I at least have the honest answer. And they also know when I don't have the answer.
I want to rest on that I don't know for a second, because I think both in parenting and teaching and anything, like, grown-ups can worry that if they say, I don't know, that it comes at a cost to their authority. And what I want to actually say is it's actually the opposite. That for a leader to be able to say, I don't know, but either here's what I do know, or here's what I will know, or the minute I know, you will know, is actually how you retain authority in these moments. And it also means that when you tell them something you do know, they believe you because they know you will tell them if you don't know. And so I would say probably the three most valuable words that leaders are going to have right now are the I don't know, and then here's what I can tell you, or here's what I will tell you.
I 100% agree. It's I think it's hard for us to sometimes get there, but that it works. And just give them the facts. That's all we've got. Going back to Dr. Amy Acton, that's all we've got is the facts. But maybe my last question was more, how do we motivate staff and reward them? Because honestly, this is the time when I am seeing people shine across the organization and in new and different ways. How can I motivate them and show value when some people were laid off and then they've come back? Some people, I don't have the budget that I used to have. We've made pay cuts. how do I continue to keep them motivated and make sure they know they're valued?
So you all know more than I do about how everybody feels rewarded by different things. You know, I feel like that kind of like there's the 5 love languages. I'm sure there's the 5 office languages, right? In terms of how you communicate and what feels like a communication of worth and value. Here's something that comes in from the psychological research side that I think is pretty exciting stuff. We've long studied stress, and we've long studied the impact of major stressful events. And one of the real innovations in our research field was when somebody asked a really good question, which was, is it the catastrophic event that does people in, or is it the daily hassles that arrive as a result of the catastrophic event that do people in? So when there's a hurricane, is it the hurricane, or is it the bus route you used to ride is gone and now you don't know how to get to work? When the spouse dies, is it the death of the spouse, which is bad, but you also can't find the checkbook, right? I mean, like that, all of these things. And what they found was the daily hassles were a major factor when they looked at people over a 6-month stretch. So if people had a lot of daily hassles, they were in terrible shape. And if people had fewer, they were in better shape in the face of the same catastrophe. So what I would say as you start to try to engage people, and this gets into that thing of both caring about their personal lives, but not getting, crossing the line. I would say something like, can you tell me your top 3 stressors right now? Like, what are the 3 stressors? And I would give them a sample list, and it could be something like, I can't eat another chicken burger. Like that could be on the list. Or I'm really scared for my mother-in-law's health. Like, I mean, like really find out what they want to share, because then they get to share. And then I would actually not underestimate the value of addressing what we call micro stressors, right? So we talked, catastrophes unleash daily hassles. The technical term is, major stressors unleash micro stressors. So I think if you really want people to feel valued, find out what their micro stressors are. And either empathize if you can't fix them, because you may not be able to fix them, but having empathy for a micro stressor goes really far. Or start a recipe exchange if the micro stressor is, I can't have another chicken burger. But those actually are quite significant in terms of people's experience of stress. And they are much more in the range of what we may be able to either empathize with or address than the big stuff that we're all still feeling uncertain about.
Great. So Kelley, I think I'll turn it back to you so we don't run out of time for everyone else's questions.
Yeah, thank you. I will try to summarize. That was beautifully put, Lisa. That, I mean, we've been saying meet employees where they are, and you just brought the psychology behind how important that truly is. And some of those stressors have just been mounting because we haven't physically been able to see people and pass them in the hallway and have that water cooler conversation. So something that might have been bothering somebody 10 weeks ago, they carried it home with them, and now it has mounted to something. So I think having those conversations, again, is so important. So we kind of covered this, but I want to get through all of these. So what do you feel are the most critical behaviors for leaders to model as we reopen? And we already said, being vulnerable. And I know I've been told personally the times over the past 2 months that people have appreciated me is when I have been the most vulnerable, and I have said I don't have all the answers. So anything else to add for that besides being vulnerable and being transparent? Anything else to add to that question?
Well, Kelley, I want to unpack what you just did that you probably are not even conscious that you just did around saying, I don't have all the answers. Mm-hmm. So there's 2 things happening in that communication at once. And this is what I want leaders to do. So the lyrics, the words you said, are honest and humble, right? I don't have all the answers. The tune with which you said them is confident and forward-looking. And that's the kind of communication that we want. We want honest lyrics and a reassuring tune. Mm-hmm. And you could say those exact same words in a way that terrified your employees.
Right.
If you put a different tune around it. Mm-hmm. So that's how I want us to think about this. Honest, direct, complete, and transparent communications wrapped in a tone that makes people feel that it's going to be okay and you're going to help them get there. So then you have to take good enough care of yourself that you can do that. Mm-hmm. And you're not always going to feel that way. So you cannot be communicating with your employees when you're not feeling that way.
Very true. There's times when we know you just need to put the email away and not respond to that email, right? Sleep on it, take a few breaths, and probably more than ever, we need to do that now. Yeah. Thank you. I think this one is a great question. Needing to be creative is very real, but I think we should acknowledge that having to be creative in almost every situation can be exhausting. And you already hit on the fact that we are exhausted. So any thoughts on that?
Yes. So, okay. So one of the other, I have pet areas of research. The other is decision-making fatigue. It's real. You're the last people I have to tell. Making decisions is unbelievably exhausting. And those of you in leadership positions, reinventing entire organizations from the ground up, are making so many decisions. It requires so much creativity. It actually creates, I find in myself, you're a bone tired. You're not tired from the end of the day. You are bone tired from doing it. There's a really beautiful, there was an article, we'll pass some stuff around. It was in the Washington Post. Jenny Wallace was the first author on it recently, about creating policies. So one thing I think to consider, and it's personal policies. So if you're running out of energy for making decisions, try to go to a policy, which is, I always put my meetings, I don't put them back to back. I give myself 15 minutes between every meeting, right? Something like that, where I can't be creative anymore, but I can have certain things that I know are going to happen and I can fall back on those. A very elaborate policy is a routine, right? Doing things in a routinized way. So we've all lost our routines. You are building routines for your companies. Those are exhausting. You probably can't get those routines fully in place because we're just starting from scratch. So what policies can you use to guide your decision-making? That we're always going to put this first, or we're always going to have this as the priority in leading our decision-making. So think big guidelines within which you are creative. Because just starting from scratch, as you opposed to everything, is going to be exhausting.
That's great. And on the policies, if you haven't thought about new policies for returning to work, make sure that you're doing that, and make sure that you're enforcing those and communicating those policies before anyone steps onto your campus, so that they are crystal clear. Bob, I know we only have 5 minutes left. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes. Probably time for 2 more questions, I'd say.
Okay, great. We have a comment here that I see there's some comments in here about internships. I want to give a plug. If at all possible, please continue your internships program. I am so concerned about these students that have worked so hard to get to where they are. And I understand, because maybe you've cut hours and you've cut salaries, but it was just 12 weeks ago that I was giving a presentation on how hard it was to find top talent and how hard it was to find sometimes any talent. I don't want us to get back into that situation because we aren't giving these interns. So maybe it doesn't need to be an entire summer, but perhaps it can just be a project or something to give them an opportunity. So my little plug for interns. How are leaders on this call creating opportunities for teams to engage with each other outside of massive Zoom calls? Any thoughts, Jill or Lisa, on this, how to engage with people outside of these technology opportunities?
I'll let Jill take this.
Yeah. So I will say it's been really difficult, but I think, Lisa, you actually pointed out a way that you've done it, which is that you actually found a way to walk with a colleague at, in a different way. And I think I read a great article on sort of why do we miss these casual friends? And they also said, but then how do you connect with them? And I think some of this is allowing yourself to reach out to a colleague where you may have never done anything socially with them before, but ask them to go on a walking meeting instead of, if you are close enough, ask them to do something that might be a little bit different. And to be honest, I've found it really helpful just to not do a Zoom call and just pick up the phone and call someone. It's really refreshing because otherwise it feels like I'm watching TV all day. And so going back to sort of old-fashioned conference call, I've actually found it kind of helpful. But I also think it's this idea of also just finding those unique ways, whether it's having a walking meeting with someone or, you could go and sit in a park or do something. But And then honestly, sending little notes of value. I've also found that help, where you do something where I've sent people notes because I can mail something to them. And it's a little way, this again goes back to acknowledgement, but connecting with your employees in different ways. I mean, I've just found it helpful to come up with sort of almost like old-fashioned ways to connect with them. So we've done standing meetings too, by the way. We're in an outdoor facility. So I also know that our HORT team does big sort of, if you think about going to camp, big circle meetings, but they stand 6 feet apart and they have their meetings outdoors in a large circle. So you can do things a little bit differently.
All right, we've got one more question. This is from my good friend Damien. How do you navigate leading the team back to the office when as a leader you are managing keeping your own immunocompromised spouse safe, or elderly parent or child, whatever it may be? Lisa, I don't know how comfortable you feel answering this question. Okay, go for it. Thanks.
Well, it's such a good question, because I think we have to assume that everybody is dealing with something of that level. Right? Whether they are or not, you're better off working with the assumption that they are as scared as you are. And so I would actually use that fear to guide how you go about things. I mean, one of the places where I'm watching people struggle or do this poorly is when they themselves are not scared, so they assume everybody else should not be scared too. And so I actually think probably the better leaders right now are going to be the ones who can imagine the most frightening scenario and maybe not imagine it, maybe you're living it, and then are going to lead from that place. So I would see it as an asset as you think about what your people are going to need, whether they need it or not.
That's great. That's great. And I think, I also said leaders need to be setting the example from minute one that you're leading back the organization. And so as us leaders collectively, if we are leading from that place, right, that we don't know where every employee is coming from, but we're leading from the most scared employee that that we should be doing a better job than we are. So I think that we're on our way. Lisa and Jill, thank you so much for this. This was, I took notes myself. I learned a lot, even though we've talked about this in detail. So hopefully everyone took away as many takeaways as I did. So Bob, Marianne.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Really appreciate your sharing your experience and expertise. I'm scrolling faces as the conversation's happening. There were a lot of nodding heads, and you can see the appreciation on people's faces. Marianne, I'll look to you to close us out.
Thanks so much, Bob. And Lisa, Jill, Kelley, this was phenomenal, really, really helpful, and so timely as we are beginning that transition back. So thank you for your time and for sharing your wisdom.